A boy stood alone in a clearing in the dark, an axe in his hands, and listened to the woods begin to move. Not the wind, not the deer, men, low and quiet, coming up the slope through the trees, more of them than he could count. Behind him, a small girl with a one-eared rabbit stood frozen in a doorway lit from below. A doorway that led down into the earth, into a secret a dead man had buried beneath this ground long before either child was born. He was 18. He had nothing in this world but her, and 500 acres of land that powerful people seemed willing to do anything to take. His heart slammed against his ribs. Somewhere out there in the dark, a decision was being made about whether the two of them would see the morning. And he understood, in that breathless moment, that some inheritances are not gifts at all. They are wars, waiting to be claimed. The brass key was small, smaller than it had any right to be, given everything it would come to mean. It sat in the boy's open palm like a question no one had ever bothered to ask him, worn smooth at the edges, darkened by years of being held by hands he had never known. There was a weight to it that had nothing to do with metal. Eli Carver was 18 years old, and he had learned a long time ago not to trust gifts. Gifts came with hooks in them. A new pair of shoes meant a new family that would not keep him. A birthday cake meant someone was leaving. Kindness, in the places he had grown up, was a thing you watched carefully, the way you watch a stray dog that might be friendly or might not. So when a tall old man in a quiet office slid this key across a wide wooden desk and said it belonged to him now, Eli did not smile. He only closed his fingers around it and waited for the catch. The office smelled of old paper and floor polish, of decisions made about people who would never sit in these leather chairs. Sunlight came through a tall window in a single slow column, and inside that column, a speck of dust turned and turned, going nowhere. Beside Eli, in a chair too big for her, sat a girl. She was 10, small for her age, with serious eyes that took in everything and gave away nothing. She held a worn, stuffed rabbit against her chest, a rabbit that had lost most of its color and one of its ears. Her name was Nora, and she was watching that single speck of dust drift through the light as if it were the most interesting thing in the room. She was his sister, and as of that morning, she was his to keep. "Your grandfather," the old man said, "asked me to give that to you, personally. He was very particular about it." The old man's name was Mortimer. He had a face that looked carved from something hard, and then softened by a long life of watching. He did not offer the kind of bright, tired sympathy Eli had learned to brace against. He simply spoke, slow and even, like a man reading from a book he had read many times. "A grandfather," Eli said. The words felt strange in his mouth, because as far as the boy had ever been told, there was no one. No grandfather, no grandmother, no family at all, beyond the little girl in the chair beside him. They had been two leaves on a tree that had lost every other leaf. That was the whole story, the only story anyone had ever given him. And now an old man was telling him there had been someone all along. "Walter Carver," Mortimer said. "I was his friend, for longer than you've been alive. He let that settle. He did not rush it. He left you something." Outside the window, the town went on with its small morning business. A delivery truck idled at a light. A woman crossed the street with a paper cup of coffee. The ordinary world, doing the ordinary things it always did, while inside this quiet room, the floor was beginning to tilt very slightly beneath an 18-year-old boy's feet. Mortimer opened a folder. He turned it so Eli could see. "Land," he said. 500 acres of it. Up in the hills, a good ways from here. It's been in the family longer than there were maps to put it on. 500 acres. The number didn't mean anything to Eli. He had spent his whole life in rooms measured in steps, in bunks and hallways and cafeterias that smelled the same in every building. Acres were a thing other people had. Acres were a word from a different kind of life. For one quick, dangerous second, something rose in his chest. A place. A real place. With a name. With his name. And then, the way it always did, the other shoe dropped. "There's a debt against it," Mortimer said. His voice didn't change. He had clearly delivered hard news before. Back taxes, a large amount. Enough that the county means to take the land and sell it, unless it's paid. And the clock is already running. There it was. The hook inside the gift. Eli almost laughed. Almost. It was so exactly what he had expected that it was nearly a comfort. A dead man's land, wrapped up in a debt no orphan could pay. A trap dressed as a treasure. The universe had been pulling this trick on him his whole life, and at least it was consistent. He looked down at the key in his hand. He thought about setting it back on the desk. "There is, however, an offer." The old man said it carefully. "The way you set down something fragile. A buyer. Someone who has been quietly gathering up land in that part of the hills for years now. They want this piece. They've made an offer that would clear the debt entirely and leave a little something over. Enough for a fresh start. A small apartment somewhere, a used car, a real bed for your sister. A buyer. No name, just a buyer. A shape with money. Somewhere, out beyond the window. And the offer was, by any reasonable measure, the only sensible thing in the room. Eli understood that at once. The math was simple. Take the offer, walk away, and never think about 500 acres of trouble again. Put Nora in a real school. Give her a door she could close, and a window that was hers. Any reasonable person would take it. "Why do they want it?" Eli asked. His own voice surprised him. He didn't ask questions, as a rule. Questions cost you something. Mortimer was quiet for a moment. "Hard to say, with these folks. Water, maybe, or minerals. Or maybe they just like to own things, and then sit on them. Take a piece of ground right off the map and let it go quiet." His eyes lingered on Eli a beat too long. "Your grandfather," the old man said slowly, "did not trust them, not one bit. And before he passed, he was very clear about one thing." He reached into the folder again. He took out a single sheet of paper, folded soft with age, and a second small object he set beside it. He wanted you to see the land, with your own eyes, before you decide anything. The second object was a coin, or something like a coin. A small disc of dark steel with a bird stamped into the face of it, wings spread wide as if caught in the moment just before flight. Eli picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "See the land," he repeated. There was nothing out there to see. He understood that. A few hundred acres of rock and scrub the county was about to swallow. A pile of someone else's bad luck. And yet, a man he had never met had held this key, had set it aside, had told an old lawyer to keep it in a drawer for years and years, and to put it in the hand of an 18-year-old grandson on this exact morning. That was not nothing. A person did not do a thing like that for no reason. Eli looked over at his sister. Nora had stopped watching the dust. She was watching him now. She had a way of going very still when something mattered, the way a small animal goes still in tall grass. She did not say anything. She did not have to. The whole question was in her face. "Are we going to go see it?" Eli closed his hand around the bird. "We'll see the land," he said. Mortimer nodded once, as if a thing he had been waiting on for a very long time had finally come to pass. He stood, his knees cracking like dry kindling. "There's a man up that way who'll meet your bus," he said. "He'll take you the last of the road. After that..." He paused. "After that, it's just the two of you." At the door, he stopped Eli with a hand on his shoulder. The grip was firmer than the boy expected from a man so old. "My advice, son. Take the offer. There's nothing out there but quiet and trouble. A clean start is worth more than 500 acres of the past." It was good advice, sound advice, the advice anyone would give. But the key was warm in Eli's palm now, warm from his own hand. And there was a stubborn little thought taking root somewhere under his ribs. A story isn't over until you've read the last page. And his grandfather, for some reason no one could explain, had wanted him to read this one. The bus ride out of town took most of a day. It was a journey down through the layers of the world. First the busy streets, the horns and the crowds, and the gray weight of buildings pressed close together. Then the edges of things. The wide flat stores, the parking lots, the houses lined up in neat identical rows like teeth. And then, slowly, the houses thinned. The road began to climb. The land rose up on either side in long green folds, hills stacked behind hills, fading into a soft blue haze where the sky came down to meet them. The trees grew taller, closer. The sky grew wider than any sky Eli had ever stood under. Other people got on and off along the way. A woman with a baby. A young man with a duffel bag. They came and went inside their own small lives, and none of them looked twice at the boy and the little girl who stayed on, all the way to the end of the line. Nora slept for much of it, her head heavy against her brother's arm. The bus rocked her like something patient and kind. Eli stayed awake. He watched the world change through the smeared glass and tried to picture a man he had no memory of. A grandfather who had built rooms, Mortimer said, and then gone quiet, who had set aside a key, who, for reasons buried somewhere in the hills ahead, had decided that two children he had never come for were worth a final, careful gift. When the bus finally hissed to a stop, the place was barely a place at all, a patch of gravel beside a two-lane road, a small store with a single dusty window, a faded sign that read Pine Hollow in letters the sun had nearly eaten away, and around it, on every side, the trees. The first thing Nora did when her sneakers touched the ground was stop. She tipped her head back. She breathed in deep, her small chest rising. Her eyes went wide at the size of the sky, at all that open air, at a world with no walls in it anywhere. "It smells green," she said softly. It was the most words she had offered all day. A rusted truck sat beside the store. The man inside it had a face like an apple left too long in the sun, all soft folds and weather. He watched them step off the bus with eyes that were curious, but not unkind. The eyes of a man who had decided long ago to mind his own business and expected the same in return. He did not get out. He lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in a small, dry wave. "You'd be the Carver kids," he said. It was not a question. His name was Hollis. He swung their cardboard box and their 2 backpacks into the truck bed without ceremony, and they climbed into a cab that smelled of old vinyl and wood smoke. The truck pulled away from the store, away from the road, and into the deep folds of the hills. "Heard somebody's been sniffing around that land," Hollis said after a while. His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. He kept his eyes on the road. "Want my advice? Sell it. Nothing good ever came off that ground." Eli asked him what he meant. The old man was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandfather was a strange one," he said at last. "Kept to himself, built that place up with his own 2 hands, and then one day, he just wasn't there anymore." He glanced sideways. "Folks have their stories, none of them happy. This isn't a place for kids." The pavement gave out a few miles in. The road became a rutted dirt track, climbing along the curve of a creek that ran clear and quick over flat brown stones. The trees closed overhead until they made a green tunnel, and the light came down through the leaves in shifting, broken pieces. It was beautiful. The kind of beautiful a wild thing is. The kind that promises nothing about whether it will be gentle with you. After a while, Hollis stopped the truck. He pointed through the windshield with 1 thick finger. "This is as far as the road'll take me. Path's washed out up ahead. 1/2 a mile, maybe more. You'll know it when you see it." Eli paid him the fare from a thin envelope of cash. Hollis took it without a word, but he looked at the 2 of them for a moment longer than he needed to. Something passed behind his eyes. A man who knew exactly what kind of place he was leaving 2 children in. "You got a way to call for help?" Eli held up a cheap phone. There was no signal. The little bar at the top showed a flat, hopeless line. Hollis just shook his head slowly. "Well," he said, "good luck to you." And then the truck was gone, backing and turning and rumbling away down the track, its taillights blinking out between the trees. And in the space it left behind, the silence of the woods came rushing in like water filling a hole. Wind in the leaves, the far-off whisper of the creek, and the loud, frantic beating of a boy's own heart. Eli hoisted the box onto his shoulder. He looked at his sister. Her eyes were enormous, drinking in the wall of green, the cathedral of trees, the smell of damp earth and pine. "It's like a jungle," she whispered. There was something close to wonder in it. "Come on," Eli said, pushing a confidence he didn't feel up into his voice. "Let's go find our castle." And so they went. 2 children with a cardboard box, walking up a washed-out path, into the heart of the hills. The trail was less a path than a suggestion. Briars caught at their sleeves. The air grew thick and warm under the trees. The box dug into Eli's shoulder, and his shirt was soaked through with sweat by the time the trees began, at last, to thin. They stepped into a clearing, and there it was, their inheritance, their 500 acres, their castle. It was a shack, a small, sagging, gray-boarded shack, hunched in the middle of the clearing like something tired and ashamed. Its roof dipped in the center like the back of an old sway-backed horse. One window was boarded over with mismatched planks. The door hung crooked on a single rusted hinge. A stone chimney leaned hard to one side, as if it had grown weary of standing. This was it. This was the thing he had refused good money for. The thing he had dragged his little sister across the world to find. A pile of rotting wood. The last small ember of hope Eli had been carrying went out in his chest, and something colder took its place, something that tasted like shame. He set the box down on the soft carpet of pine needles. He could not look at Nora. He could not bear to see her face fall. He waited for the tears, for the small, wounded voice asking to go home, though they had never had a home to go to. It did not come. Instead, she walked, slowly. Her footsteps made no sound on the needles. She crossed the clearing and reached out one small hand and laid it flat against the rough gray wood of the wall, the way you might touch the side of a sleeping animal to see if it would wake. "It's quiet here," she said. Eli looked at her then. She was not crying. She was not disappointed. She was looking at the place the way she looked at everything, patiently, carefully, the way a scientist looks at something it does not yet understand but means to, with wonder, with a willingness to find out what it truly was. That was Nora. She had always seen the things her brother missed. He let out a long breath. He pushed the despair back down where it lived. There would be no walking back to the bus stop today, not before dark. They would have to stay the night. That much, at least, was certain. The door groaned in protest, but it opened. Inside was a single small room, dry, surprisingly, thick with the smell of dust and time. A crude table and one chair stood in the center. A rusted stove crouched in a corner, and against the back wall, a stack of old blankets had been folded and set down with what looked like care. It was bleak, but it was shelter. While Nora explored with a child's slow curiosity, running her fingers along the table, peering into the cold belly of the stove, Eli began a search of his own. He did not know what he was looking for. A clue, maybe. A reason. Something to explain why a stranger of a grandfather would leave them this. He ran his hands along the walls. He tapped at the floorboards with the toe of his shoe. Most of them were solid, but near the back, beneath the corner of those carefully folded blankets, one board was different. It was shorter than the others. When he pressed it, it gave. Just a fraction of an inch. But it gave. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He pried at it with his fingers. The wood splintered. He worked the edge of the brass key under the lip and levered, and with a small dry crack, the board came up. Beneath it was a dark square hollow, and inside the hollow, a heavy box, the kind a soldier might carry, olive-colored metal, sealed with a simple steel clasp. Eli's hands were not quite steady as he lifted it out and set it on the floor. He worked the clasp. The lid sprang open with a soft click. He had expected papers, maybe. An old photograph. Something sentimental and worthless. What he saw made the breath stop in his throat. Money. Stacks of it. Bills, bundled and banded. More money than the boy had seen gathered in one place in the whole of his life. He did not count it. His hands were shaking too hard to count it. But at a glance, he knew it was far, far more than the buyer had offered. Far more than the debt. Far more than any reason he could think of. Money, hidden under the floor of a rotting shack in the middle of the hills, waiting all this time. And beneath the stacks of bills lay something else, a small hand crank flashlight, a second key, this one silver and heavier, hung on a thin chain, and one folded square of paper, soft at the creases. Eli unfolded it with great care. It was a map, a simple thing drawn by hand. The shack was marked with a small square, and beneath the square, in neat, careful block letters, a single word. Shed, not house. Shed. And some distance behind it, marked with a careful X, 3 more words had been written in the same patient hand. The real house. Eli looked up. Nora was standing in the doorway, watching him. Her small face was very still. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. He didn't know how. He gathered up the flashlight and the silver key and the strange steel bird on its chain. He stood, his knees stiff, and stepped back out into the late gold light of the clearing. He walked to the spot the map marked. There was nothing there, just a tangle of overgrown bushes and a low rise of earth, a few gray rocks half buried in the slope. Nothing that looked like a house, nothing that looked like anything at all. He pushed at the bushes with his boot, then with his hands, and then he saw it. It was not a house. It was a door. A heavy plate of steel set flat into the ground, flush with the rock around it, and someone, with a great deal of patience, had painted it to look exactly like stone. The mineral streaks, the lichen, the hairline cracks. From 3 steps away, the eye slid right past it. From 10, it simply did not exist. In the center of the door was a keyhole, and beside the keyhole, a small round recess, just the size of a coin, just the size of a steel bird with its wings spread wide. Eli knelt. The cold of the metal came up through the knees of his jeans. He could feel how thick it was beneath him, how solid. No one had put this here by accident. No one had put it here cheaply. A man had buried this in the heart of his own land, and he had hidden it, so carefully, so well, that it might have stayed hidden for the rest of time. The silver key slid into the lock. Eli turned it, and somewhere deep beneath his hand, something answered, a heavy mechanical sound, bolts drawing back, old machinery waking, slow and reluctant, after a long, long sleep. He pressed the steel bird into the recess. For a moment, nothing. And then, from somewhere below, a soft hum began. Steady. Electrical. The sound of something coming back to life. He felt it in his palms. He felt it in the soles of his feet. The whole rocky rise seemed to wake beneath him, and with a long, slow hiss of air, the steel door began to rise. It lifted like the lid of a great chest, smooth, patient, and from the dark seam beneath it came a breath of cold, clean air, air that smelled of nothing the woods had ever held, stone and machinery and a strange, sealed cleanliness. Beneath the rising door, a set of concrete steps descended into a darkness so complete that the last of the daylight could not seem to reach the 3rd stair down. Nora had come up behind him. She had made no sound at all. She slipped her small hand into his. "Eli," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Yeah. What is it?" He stared down into the dark. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a great many things he had believed about his life were beginning, quietly, to come apart. His grandfather had not simply been a strange old man who had gone quiet from loneliness, the way the stories said. His grandfather had been a man with a secret, a large one, a deliberate one. A secret he had locked inside the rock of his own land and left behind a brass key in an old lawyer's drawer. For a grandson's 18th birthday, Eli clicked on the little flashlight. Its beam was thin and yellow, but steady. He aimed it down the steps. The light caught smooth gray walls, a clean concrete floor, a second door waiting at the bottom. He looked at his sister, at the rabbit pressed to her chest, at the two of them standing at the top of a stairway into the earth that no one in the whole world knew they had found. "I think," he said slowly, "this is the real house." He took the first step down, and after a moment, her hand still tight in his, Nora followed. Above them, the clearing held its breath. The wind moved soft in the pines. The light went gold, and then amber, and the rotting gray shack stood watch over 500 acres of someone's long, patient silence. And below them, in the dark, something had been waiting a very long time to be found. The descent felt like stepping out of one world and into another. The air grew cooler with each stair. The light from above gave up, one step at a time, until the only glow left was the thin yellow beam of the little flashlight and the steady tread of 2 pairs of feet on smooth, cold concrete. Eli counted as he went. 20 steps, 25, 30. At the bottom, they stood in a small entry. Another door waited. There was no handle on it. Only a single round button set into the wall, glowing faint and red behind a film of dust. Every instinct the boy had ever sharpened told him to be careful, to distrust unknown rooms, to distrust anything that seemed too much like a gift. But he had come this far. He pressed the button. For a moment, nothing. Then a low hum stirred behind the wall. A row of soft clicks, locks letting go one after another. A line of light bloomed along the top of the door. And then the whole space beyond it flooded with a steady, even glow. The power was on. The door slid back into the wall, smooth as breath. And what waited beyond it was no cellar, no damp hole in the ground, no cold concrete tomb of the kind the boy had braced himself for. It was a home, a strange one, a home with no windows, no sky, no sound of birds, but a home all the same. A long hallway stretched ahead, walls painted a soft, calm gray. Somewhere, a quiet system stirred the air, and it moved across their faces like a gentle hand. Their footsteps echoed as they walked. Doors lined the hallway. The first opened onto a small, tidy kitchen, a little stove, shelves stacked with cans, each one labeled in that same neat hand. A coffee tin on the counter, its lid still sealed. Everything wore a soft coat of dust. And yet everything had been kept, arranged, cared for, as if the person who lived here had only stepped out for a walk and meant to come right back. Another door, a small washroom, folded towels gone stiff with time, and then a third door. This one Eli opened slowly. Inside was a single room, and the walls of it stopped his breath. The drawings, they covered the wall from end to end, pencil on plain paper, taped up in careful rows, and they were all of the same thing. A little girl drawn at every age, a baby in someone's arms, a toddler reaching for something just out of frame, a child of 5 or 6 with 2 front teeth missing, a girl with serious eyes and a stuffed rabbit held against her chest. Nora went very still beside him. The rabbit in the drawings had one ear, just like hers. "That's me," she whispered. It was, drawn by a hand that had never once seen her. Drawn from, what? A memory of a single photograph? A guess? A hope? Someone had sat in this quiet room, year after year, and tried to imagine what a little girl might look like as she grew. Tried to draw a child he was not allowed to hold. Eli's throat went tight. He did not understand it yet. Not fully. But he understood enough to feel the floor shift again beneath him. And this time, it was not fear that moved it. It was something he did not have a name for. He stepped back into the hall. Nora's hand found his. At the end of the corridor was a larger room, a study of sorts, a worn armchair, soft and sunken from years of sitting, a shelf packed tight with books, and in the center, on a wide wooden desk, a small machine, an old cassette player, the kind with 2 turning reels behind a little window. Beside it, a neat stack of tapes, each one labeled in that same patient block hand, and folded over the back of the chair. An old jacket, worn at the elbows, and resting on top of it, a thin chain with 2 small metal tags hanging from it. Eli walked to the desk the way a person walks into a church they have never seen before. He lifted the tags, turned them in the light. The metal was worn smooth at the edges, as if it had been carried in a pocket and rubbed between 2 fingers across a long, long stretch of years. There was a name stamped into it. A name he was only beginning to learn was his own. Carver. He set them down again, gently. He picked up the top tape from the stack. The label, in that neat hand, read 4 words. Play this one first. His hands were not steady, and he did not bother to hide it. He wanted Nora to see that he was afraid. He wanted her to understand that being afraid was not something to be ashamed of. He sat down in the old man's chair. He drew his sister down onto the arm of it beside him, and he pressed the worn plastic button marked Play. The speakers hissed. The reels began to turn. And then a voice filled the quiet room. A man's voice, low, calm, carrying the slow, deliberate weight of someone who has thought very carefully about every word he is about to say. Eli, Nora, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and you've found your way home. Home. The words struck the boy in the chest like a hand laid flat. He had never been called home before. Not the places he had grown up. Not the rooms with their bunks and their chore charts and their rules about which cabinet held the cereal. None of it had been home. Home had been a word for other people. The voice went on. My name is Walter Carver. I'm your grandfather. And I know that for the whole of your lives, you've believed I left you, that nobody came. I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it before anything else. A pause. The tape hissed in the silence. I never left you. Eli's vision blurred. He gripped the edge of the desk. I was here, the whole time, right here, under your feet, for the better part of 10 years. Close enough that on a still night, the wind moving through these trees was the same wind moving over the place where you slept. I knew where you were, every single day. And every single day, I chose to stay where I was. Nora made a small sound. Eli could not look at her. He could not look at anything but the slow turning of the reels. I know how that must sound. A man who knew and stayed away. There's no word kind enough to make that sound like love. But love is what it was. The hardest kind. the kind that lets itself be misunderstood, so that the people it's protecting can go on living. There's a great deal you need to know, my children, about your mother, about your father, about the night they were taken from you, and about why an old man chose a concrete room over the chance to hold his own grandchildren. The voice paused. A breath. When it returned, it was older, more tired, more human. What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you thought you knew. About them, about me, about the world you grew up in, and about a choice you're going to be standing in front of very soon. Take your time with it. There are other tapes. Go slow. And know that whatever you decide, when the time comes, you decide it free. The first one in this family, in a long, long while, to do so. A soft click. The reel stopped. Side one had ended. The lights hummed overhead. Somewhere deep in the walls, a quiet machine cycled on with a gentle shudder. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Eli sat very still in his grandfather's chair, in a room buried in the earth, holding a pair of worn metal tags warm from his own palm, and trying to take a full breath that would not come. Nora's hand crept into his. "Eli," she said. Her voice was small. He nodded. He could not speak yet. He reached out, slowly, and turned the tape over. He did not play it right away. There was a feeling in him that this had to be done gently, the way you turn the pages of something fragile. So instead, he stood, and he found a second tape, one labeled with a single date he did not recognize, and a third. And he understood without being told that the old man had left this story in pieces on purpose, a little at a time, so that two children would not have to swallow the whole of it in one bite. He played them in order, and across the slow turning of those reels, a life began to take shape in the quiet room. The boy learned that his grandfather had once worked at a kind of work that meant listening, sitting in rooms with sounds in his ears, searching for patterns in the noise, finding the shape of things hidden inside other things. It was patient work, lonely work, and the old man had been good at it, perhaps too good, because one day the voice on the tape explained he had heard something he was not meant to hear. It started as the smallest thing, a pattern where there shouldn't have been one, a whisper underneath the noise. Most men, after enough years, learn to stop listening. I was the other kind. I never could leave a loose thread alone. What he found was a thing too large for any one man to hold. The old man kept it vague. On the tapes, he spoke of powerful people, men who moved money and ruined lives the way other men move pieces across a board, men who answered to no one. He did not give them faces, not on the tapes. He spoke of them the way you might speak of a storm you had seen coming from a long way off, something with a shape and a direction and no mercy in it at all. There's a kind of person, Eli, who believes the rules are for other people, who believes they live above the line. And once you've seen them clearly, once you've understood what they're capable of, you can't unsee it. I tried to take what I'd found to people I thought would help. I was told to let it go. I was told to think of my family. A pause. Heavier than the others. That was the mistake. The day I understood the shape of what they were, I became a man who knew too much. And men who know too much about people like that do not get to grow old in peace. Eli leaned forward in the chair without realizing he had moved. Across the room, Nora sat very still, her arms wrapped around her rabbit, her serious eyes fixed on the little machine as if it were a living thing. The next tape was the hardest. The voice on it had changed. There was a roughness in it now, a grief that had clearly lived in this room for a long, long time. Your mother and father were good people. I want you to hold on to that before I tell you the rest. Your father wanted to be a teacher. Did you know that? He had this way of explaining things, slow and patient, until the hardest idea went soft and simple in your hands. Your mother could make a stranger feel like family inside 5 minutes. They were young. They were happy. The last time we spoke, your father told me he was happy. He said it twice, like he wanted it on the record. The tape hissed. They didn't leave you on purpose, my children. They didn't have a say in it. What happened to them was made to look like an accident. It was no accident. Eli's breath stopped. He did not move. He could not. It was a message, meant for me, to show me they could reach anyone, anywhere, that there was no fence high enough, no door thick enough. They wanted me to understand that they could take whatever I loved, whenever they chose, and they were not finished. There were still 2 small things in this world that I loved more than my own life. The voice broke, just slightly. You and your sister. In the quiet room, Nora reached over and took her brother's hand in both of hers. She did not say anything. She had understood. Children always understand more than the grown-ups around them believe. So I did the only thing left to do. I made the world believe I was gone. I let go of my own name. I let them lower an empty box into the ground and say words over it. And the cruelest thing, the thing that has cost me more than anything else in this long life, I let you go where I knew they would never think to look for you. A place full of forms and case numbers where 2 small children with no name worth tracing would be invisible, forgotten, safe. The voice gentled, the way a voice gentles only when it speaks to children. Every cold night you spent in a strange bed, I knew. Every time one of you ran a fever, I knew. And I stayed in this room with my hand flat against this wall, and I stayed away. Because each day I let you grow up without me was one more day they did not come for you. There's no harder kind of love than that, Eli. To love someone enough to be hated by them for years. To choose every single morning not to reach for the phone, not to send the letter, not to put a hand against the glass. A long pause, a breath drawn deep. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm only telling you the truth. And the truth is this. I never stopped being your grandfather. I was just very far away and very close at the same time. The reel ran out, the hiss faded, and the room was quiet again. For a long, long time, the boy did not move. His parents had not abandoned him. They had been taken. His grandfather had not vanished from loneliness or madness. He had vanished on purpose, with terrible care, and he had spent the slow back half of his life in a buried room, close enough to feel the same weather, far enough to keep 2 children breathing. Eli felt the warmth of his sister's hand around his. And then he felt the wetness on the back of it and understood that she was crying quietly, the way she did everything. He had thought the whole long way here On the bus, up the dirt road, through the broken door of the shack above, that he was the one who would have to be strong, that it was his job to carry her. He understood now that it had never been one direction. She was holding him. She had been holding him the whole time. He had simply been too proud, or too frightened to notice. He stood. His knees were not steady. He walked to the bookshelf and turned his back to her, because he wanted her to know that being afraid was not shameful. But a man could still choose to spare her the worst of it. And there, with his face to the spines of an old man's books, the boy cried for a long while. He cried for two people he had only just learned to call by name. He cried for the grandfather who had spent his last years with his hand against a cold wall. He cried for the boy he had been, who had believed no one wanted him, and he cried for the man he could feel himself having to become before the night was through. When he had finished, he wiped his face on his sleeve. He turned back. Nora was waiting. She had picked up a thick book from the desk, bound in worn leather, and she held it on her lap with the care of a child holding a wounded bird. "Eli," she said. "Yeah. He left us something to decide." She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright. "Didn't he?" The boy looked down the hallway, past the kitchen, past the room with the drawings, to a last door at the very end that they had not yet opened. He took a breath. "Let's go see," he said. The last door was different. The silver key turned smooth in the lock. The steel bird settled into its recess, and the door slid back with the same quiet sigh as the others. But the air that met them was cooler, cleaner, the air of a vault. Eli stepped in first. Nora stayed close behind. The room was small. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with steel shelving, and the shelves were filled with neat rows of cases, each one labeled in that same patient hand. It was the architecture of a long, careful study, organized the way a man organizes the work of a lifetime. That was one wall. The second wall was covered, edge to edge, in something else. Photographs, papers, and lines of red thread drawn from one image to the next, like a map of something the eye could not quite hold all at once. Faces looked down from that wall, men in good suits, men shaking hands, men whose comfort and ease was a kind of armor, and the threads ran between them, tying them together, and at the center, slightly larger than the rest, was one face, a man with silver hair and a square, reassuring jaw, the kind of face built to be trusted across a wide desk. A single red thread ran down from that face to a small card pinned lower on the wall, and on the card was a date. Eli did not know all the things that wall meant. He was 18. He had not been raised to read maps like this one, but he understood the shape of it, the way you understand a snake in the grass without needing its name. This was the storm his grandfather had spoken of. This was the thing that had cost his family everything. And then his eyes found two small photographs, pinned alone in the upper corner. A young man in a flannel shirt, grinning, holding a fishing pole. A young woman in a bed, holding a baby. Nora was looking at them too. She had crossed the room without a sound, the way she did, and she stood in front of those two faded snapshots for a long, long moment. "That's our mom," she said quietly. I was right. Eli did not know what she meant by right, and then, all at once, he did. She had told him once, when she was very small, that she could remember the smell of their mother's hair. He had thought she was making it up. the way little children do. He understood now that she probably had not been. "Yeah," he said. His voice was rough. "That's our mom." There was a third wall, and on a small metal table beside the door, a closed laptop, a few hard drives stacked neatly, and a folded square of paper. Eli picked up the paper. It was a note, 2 short paragraphs, in his grandfather's hand. "Eli, by the time you read this, you've heard the worst of it. So here is the simplest part. You stand in front of 2 roads. The first road is safety. The buyer will pay. They will clear the debt. They will give you and your sister enough to walk away and live quiet, comfortable lives somewhere far from here. And they will leave you alone, so long as what's in this room goes quiet with you. That is an honest offer in its way. There is no shame in taking it. None. The second road ends them. What's in this room is the truth. All of it. Kept safe all these years. If you keep it, if you refuse them, they will know. And they will not ask politely a second time. Whatever you choose, my children, choose it, because it is yours to choose. I have done all that I can. The rest of the story is yours to write." W. Eli set the note down with hands that were, for the first time that day, steady. A new kind of stillness had come into him. Not peace, exactly. Something cooler than peace. A clarity. He knelt down so that he was level with his sister's eyes. He did this because he was about to ask her a question no child should have to be asked, and because he wanted her to know that he saw her. Truly. Not as a burden. Not as a child to be managed. As a partner. "Nora," he said, "listen to me." She listened. "Grandpa left us 2 roads. We can take the offer. We can find a town, anywhere you want. A house with a real door. You can go to a real school. We can be safe." She watched him, her face very still. "Or," he said, "we can stay. We can keep what's in this room. We can stand up to the people who took Mom and Dad away from us. And it will not be safe. It will be hard. And it will be frightening for a long while." He waited. She did not look away from him. "But if we take the other road," she said slowly, "the bad ones get away with it, don't they?" It was not a question. It was the plain, clear logic of a child who had not yet learned how to lie to herself about right and wrong. She had not been given the chance to learn it. The hard years had cured her of that early. "Yeah," Eli said quietly. "They would. They'd take this place. They'd take everything Grandpa built. And no one would ever answer for what was done to our family." Nora thought about that. She walked to the metal table. She reached out and laid one small finger on the cool shell of the laptop. She traced its edge, slowly, the way she touched everything she was trying to understand. "Grandpa was brave," she said. "Yeah. And he was alone. For a really long time." She turned, and in her eyes was something the boy had not seen in any of the children he had grown up beside. A decision. "We don't have to be alone. We have each other." Eli's chest went tight. "So we should be brave too," she said. "Right, Eli?" And there it was. The choice had not been made by the 18-year-old standing in the corner of the room with a brass key in his pocket and the whole weight of 500 acres on his shoulders. The choice had been made by a 10-year-old girl in a borrowed coat, holding a one-eared rabbit, standing in a buried room with the faces of her stolen parents on the wall behind her, and every bit of his fear, his exhaustion, the quiet voice in him that whispered, "Take the money and run," all of it fell away. The boy stood. He did not have to push the smile up this time. It came on its own. "Yeah," he said, "we should be brave too." He walked back down the hallway, past the room of drawings where a little girl smiled out from 100 sheets of paper, drawn by a man who had loved her from across a wall, past the kitchen with its careful rows of cans, back to the desk where the tapes lay in their patient stack. He picked up the worn metal tags. He held them for a moment, and then he slipped the chain over his head and let them settle against his chest. The chain was a little too long, sized for a grown man. He would have to grow into it. That seemed about right. He looked at his sister. "All right," he said. "Let's get to work." Above them, far above, the clearing had gone dark. The first stars were coming out over the hills, sharp and cold and uncountable. The rotting gray shack stood watch in the dark, keeping its old secret. And below it, in a warm and quiet room, 2 children who had been told their whole lives that no one was coming, sat down together at a dead man's desk and began, at last, to read the last pages of a story that had been waiting for them all along. The morning came cold and clear. Eli climbed up out of the earth alone while his sister still slept, and he stood for a while in the clearing as the first light came down through the pines. The sky above the ridge was a high, thin blue, the kind of blue that only seems to exist up where the air is clean. He carried a small phone in a hard case to a place his grandfather's notes had marked, a flat shelf of rock where the signal would reach. He set it down. He waited as the little bars climbed, slow and reluctant, until at last there were 2. Then he made the call. The old lawyer answered on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Mortimer," the boy said. "It's Eli." A pause on the line, and then the old man's voice, softening with something that might have been surprise. "Eli, have you made your decision?" The boy breathed in the cold mountain air. He felt the weight of the metal tags resting against his chest, beneath his shirt. He looked across the clearing at the rotting gray shack that stood over 500 acres of his family's blood, and silence and patient, buried truth. "Yes, sir," he said. "What would you like me to tell the buyer?" The wind moved soft in the pines. "Tell them no." The line went very quiet. "Mr. Mortimer?" "Yes, son. I need you to come out here. There's something you have to see. Something my grandfather left. It changes everything." There was a long silence on the other end, and when the old lawyer spoke again, his voice had changed. The polite distance of a man delivering bad news to a client was gone. Something sharper had come into it, something younger. "Tomorrow," he said, "at noon, I'll be at the end of your road, alone." "Thank you, sir." "Eli," a pause. "You should understand. Telling them no is a door you can't close again once it's open." The boy thought about that. "I know," he said, and he ended the call. He folded the little antenna down, and he sat for a while on the cold rock, in the high blue morning, in a body that no longer felt entirely like a boy's. Somewhere far off, in a glass building he had never seen, a man with silver hair was about to be told that an orphan had said no. The war, such as it was, had begun, and for the first time he could remember, Eli Carver was not facing it alone. Mortimer arrived the next day at noon. Exactly. He came in a dark, quiet car that did not belong on a country road, and he parked it where the gravel gave out, and he stepped into the cold mountain air in his good suit and his polished shoes. He stood a moment, looking at the wall of trees ahead of him with the expression of a man understanding, perhaps for the first time, the distance between a courtroom and a forest. Eli was waiting on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. He stood when he saw the car. He did not call out. He simply watched the old man walk the last stretch on his own, watched his fine shoes lose their shine to the dust, watched him arrive a little winded. The boy did this on purpose. He had learned something in just a few short days on this land, that a person who has not earned a place cannot quite be trusted to defend it. He wanted the old lawyer to arrive out of breath. He wanted him to feel the weight of the climb in his own legs. When Mortimer reached him, the old man looked at him for a long second. Something in his face had shifted since the quiet office, all those miles away. He was not looking at a client anymore. "Show me," he said. The walk to the painted door was slow. Eli did not offer to hurry it. And when at last he knelt and turned the silver key and pressed the steel bird into its place, and the heavy door rose up out of the ground with its long, slow sigh, the old man did not move for a long time. Then, slowly, he took off his hat. He held it in both hands. "You stubborn, magnificent old fool," he said, to no one, to the air, to a friend who was not there to hear it. And he went down the steps ahead of the boy without being asked. The tour took the better part of 2 hours. Eli walked him through every room, the kitchen, the bunks, the study. He played him a little of the first tape and then stopped it after only a few minutes, when the old man raised one trembling hand and said, very quietly, "That's enough," of his voice, for one day. He saved the vault for last, and when the final door slid open and Mortimer stepped into that cool, sealed room and saw the wall of faces, the lines of red thread, the 2 faded photographs pinned alone in the corner, the old lawyer stood very still, and then he sat down, heavily, on the small metal stool beside the table. And he put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. And the boy understood, with a kind of distant tenderness he had not expected to feel, that this hard old man was weeping. "He was my friend," Mortimer said into his palms, "for more years than you've been on this earth. I drank his coffee. I stood beside him at funerals. I held your father when your father was no bigger than a loaf of bread. And when they put an empty box in the ground and said he was gone, I knew. I knew it wasn't true. I had no proof. He never gave me proof. But I knew." He looked up. His eyes were red, but clear. "What are we going to do, son?" The word son did not land like a thing said to a child. It landed like a vote, like a hand offered across a table. Eli thought about it. "We're going to fight," he said, "but it has to be my fight. I'll listen to you. I'll do what makes sense. But I'm the one who decides." He left this to me, not to you. A long pause. The old man nodded. Once. "All right," he said. "Then let's go to war." The days that followed were unlike any the boy had ever known. He woke at dawn. He cleared the path between the shed and the buried door. He patched the rotting boards of the old shack with cedar that Hollis brought up from town in the back of his truck. He turned a small patch of earth at the edge of the clearing and put seeds into it, the way the leather journal said a great-grandmother of his had once done, on this same ground, a long time before there were any of them to remember it. His hands cracked along the knuckles. They bled in the dry mountain air. He bandaged them at night and let the calluses build, and watched his own palms slowly become the hands of someone who worked. The land was changing him, and Nora was blooming. She took the lower bunk for her own and made it a kingdom. She covered the wall above it with drawings of her own, taped up beside the ones the old man had made of her. Hawks, mountains, the blue door of a house that did not yet exist. She read her way through the bird books on the shelf and started a little notebook of her own, full of careful observations about the clearing. Which birds came at dawn? Which tracks crossed the soft mud by the creek? She laughed sometimes now, a real laugh, sudden and bright, that her brother had not heard in the gray years behind them. She was the reason he did not break. In the evenings after she slept, he sat at the old desk and he read. He read the journal. He read the things Mortimer sent up by a quiet courier each week, simplified, careful. He learned the shape of the thing they were standing against. He was no longer simply the boy who had stepped off a bus into the woods. He was becoming something else, slowly, the way a tree becomes a tree, without noticing. The buyer's answer came in stages. First, a letter raising the offer, a generous number, the kind of number meant to make a frightened young man's breath catch. Then, 2 weeks later, a second letter. A larger number still. The third letter did not raise the offer. It threatened. Cold, careful words about lawsuits and obstruction. The fourth was a notice of some legal thing the boy did not fully understand. And the fifth was a man in a bright vest, standing on the public road at the edge of the property, taking measurements of nothing in particular. Eli watched him from the tree line. He did not raise his voice. He did not call out. He simply stood at the edge of his 500 acres, one hand resting against the bark of a great white oak, and he watched. He watched until the man's ease curdled into something uncomfortable. He watched until the man got back into his truck and drove away. The boy was learning that you did not have to shout to be heard. Sometimes you only had to refuse to look away. Then the watchers came. Aircraft began to appear over the ridge, low and slow, circling. They came at odd hours, their wash bending the tops of the pines, shaking loose the leaves. There was always a reason given when anyone asked. A survey. A training flight. Always something plausible. But the real purpose was unmistakable. They wanted the boy to feel watched. They wanted to make someone young feel small. Some days it worked. Some days it did not. And it was on one of those gray, watched mornings that Hollis told him the truth. The old man had taken to coming up the path in the half-light of dawn, 2 cups of black coffee in his hands. He would give one to the boy without a word, and the two of them would walk the edges of the property in silence. They did not speak much on those walks. They did not need to. But on this morning, with the first frost laying a faint white dust across the high grass, Hollis stopped at the edge of the eastern ridge. He looked out over the long fold of the valley below. He took a slow breath. "Your grandfather and I," he said, "we served together." A long time ago. We were young men then. Younger than you'd believe, looking at us now. Eli said nothing. He waited. We sat in a room together, the two of us, with the same kind of work in our ears, listening for the same kind of patterns. Long hours, long years. He was a quiet one, even then. Always reading, always thinking 3 steps ahead of the rest of us. A pause. After it was over, we lost touch for a long while. And then, a hard season came for my family. And one day, an envelope showed up. No name on it. Just what we needed inside. And a little more besides. I didn't have to ask who'd sent it. He looked at the boy. He was here, son. The whole time you were growing up. So was he. Right under this ground. And I was the one soul on this earth who knew it. I brought him what he needed. I kept his secret. And I waited. Waited for what? Eli asked quietly. The old man's weathered face creased into something that was nearly a smile. For you. For you to be old enough. For you to come home and figure it all out for yourself. He shook his head slowly. He told me it had to be that way. That if I just told you, it wouldn't take. That a thing handed to you isn't the same as a thing you find. He was right about that. He was right about a great many things. A long silence stretched between them in the cold. He's gone, isn't he? Eli said. It was not really a question. The old man nodded, went quiet some while back. Just sat down in that chair one evening, the way I imagine he'd always meant to, and his heart let go. I came up the next morning, and I knew before I opened the door. I dug his grave myself, under the white oak at the south fence, set a stone there, and then I waited some more. He looked at the boy with eyes gone soft. For you to walk up that path. And here you are. Eli nodded. He did not trust his voice. So he reached out instead and laid a hand on the old man's shoulder. And the two of them stood there together, the old and the young, in the white frost of a mountain morning, and watched the light come up over a valley that had kept its secrets for a very long time. The betrayal came on a cold night. A set of quiet alarms his grandfather had wired along the eastern fence stirred to life in the small hours. Eli was awake within seconds. He had been sleeping in the upper bunk above his sister, and he was up the steps and into the clearing before the second alarm finished its cycle. There was a figure at the edge of the road, crouched low, near the painted door, a small light in one hand and some kind of device in the other. Eli did not shout. He moved the way Hollis had been teaching him to move, heel before toe, knees soft, his eyes on the shape, not the face. And he was 4 steps behind the figure before it heard him. When the young man turned, Eli was already there. He did not hurt him. He took the device and the light, and he set the long handle of an axe against the man's collarbone, just enough to make the shape of the situation plain. The young man went to his knees. He did not fight. He was younger than Eli had expected, soft-faced, frightened, a face that did not belong on a mountain in the dark. Hollis appeared out of the trees, an old shotgun broken open over his arm, an apparition who had clearly been awake and waiting for a while. What have we got? He had a phone, Eli said, dropped it in the leaves. Hollis found it, did something with it that the boy did not catch. The screen lit, pale in the dark, and the old man looked at it for a long moment. His face did not change. It only went a little quieter. Eli. Yeah, You'll want to see this. The most recent name in the little glowing screen was a name the boy knew. It was Mortimer's. The cold of the clearing seemed to fall away from him. The whole world narrowed down to that small, bright rectangle in the old man's hand. And every careful thing that had been built inside him over the past weeks, the trust, the slow belief that someone was on his side, began quietly to come apart. He thought about the office, the leather chairs, the brass key, the old man weeping in the vault. 40 years of friendship with a grandfather Eli had never met. And he thought about how simple it would have been to put one of your own people next to a frightened young man, to watch the inheritance from the inside, to wait. Don't, Hollis said quietly. He had been watching the boy's face. Don't decide yet. Call him. So Eli walked to the rock shelf and set up the phone and dialed. His hands were steady, which surprised him because nothing else in him was. Mortimer answered, his voice thick with sleep. Eli, what's wrong? There's a man on the property. He had a phone. The last name on it is yours. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. When the old lawyer spoke again, the sleep was gone from his voice, and in its place was something else. It took the boy a moment to name it. It was grief. What does he look like? Eli described the young man. Another long silence. And then, in a voice that had aged 10 years, in a single moment, bring him down, lock him somewhere he can't reach a phone. I'll be there by morning. A shaking breath. His name is Dale. He's my brother's boy. My brother passed when Dale was small, and I raised him after that. He's worked for me for a few years now. He's had access to a great many things. The voice cracked clean through. I am so sorry, Eli. The boy closed his eyes. He thought, for one black second, about cutting the old man loose, about trusting no one ever again. It would have been the easy thing, the safe thing, the thing the gray years had taught him. And then he remembered a line he had read in his grandfather's journal, a line he had read 3 times that first night and not understood until just now. The cleanest test of a man is what he does after he learns he was wrong. Come at first light, Eli said. Come alone. And he ended the call. Mortimer came at dawn. He had not slept. The shoulders of his suit were creased. The skin beneath his eyes was the color of ash. He did not speak to Eli at first. He went straight down into the earth, and he stood in the doorway of the small room where the young man sat, and he looked at the nephew he had raised as his own. The young man would not meet his eyes. The old lawyer stood there for a very long time. When at last he came back up, his face had aged 5 more years. He confessed, Mortimer said. He sat down heavily across from the boy. On the way down the stairs. Didn't even make me ask. They've been paying him. For a long while now. He copied things, told them things, told them about you. His hands shook in his lap. Eli, I'll step aside. Right now. I'll hand over every file, help you find someone new. You shouldn't have to wonder, every day, whether the man at your back is... No. The old man looked up. You're going to keep working for me, Eli said, and we're going to use him. A pause. What? He's a channel. He's their eyes inside your office. So we put what we want them to believe into him, and it goes straight to them. We can move them. We can make them act before they're ready. We can make them reach for something that isn't there. Mortimer stared at the boy across the desk, and then, slowly, the old lawyer began to nod. Your grandfather, he said quietly, would have been so proud of you. He'd have liked you a great deal, son. The boy could have hated the young man. He had every reason to. He had been raised in a world that would have made hatred the natural thing. But he chose, instead, the harder thing. He let the young man go. No punishment, no cruelty, only a kind of mercy that came with a job attached. And as the young man drove away with a face that did not yet understand, he had become a different kind of thing entirely. Eli understood something about himself, that he did not have to become the people who had taken everything from his family, that a person could refuse them, and refuse to become them, both at once. The pressure deepened after that. The aircraft became routine. Dark vehicles sat at the end of the public road and did not bother to leave anymore. Twice, in the nights that followed, Hollis turned back men who tried to cross the western fence. He did not have to fire a shot. He simply rose up out of the underbrush in front of them with that old shotgun and a face that had spent a lifetime learning to look at people without blinking. And they turned around and went home. But Eli could feel it building, like the air before a storm. And so, one cold evening, he opened the last tape. It had been sitting at the very bottom of the stack, its label in the same neat hand as all the others, but written in red. Only open this if you have to fight. He held it for a long moment, and then he pushed it into the machine. Eli, his grandfather's voice said, if you're hearing this one, then either I've miscalculated badly, or you're a great deal more stubborn than I dared to hope. I suspect the second. A pause, a dry, tired warmth in it. In the top drawer of this desk is an envelope. Inside, a list of names. Each one is a man I served beside, once. Each one is alive. And each one owes me a kind of debt that was never written on any ledger. I helped them quietly across the years. None of them know about this place. None of them know about each other. But every one of them agreed, long ago, to come, if I ever called. A breath. I never called. I wouldn't pull old friends into my fight. But you may pull them into yours. There's a radio in the cabinet behind the books. The way to reach them is on the back of the envelope. Send your name and mine in 2 words, White Oak, and they'll come. A long pause. They're old men now, the way I was. But we were good once at things the world has mostly forgotten. Use them only if you must, and remember this. They are not soldiers under your command. They are your grandfather's friends. Treat them as such. The tape clicked off. Eli sat with it a long while. Then he opened the drawer. He found the envelope, and he carried it up into the cold night, and he set up the radio, and into the dark he read an old man's name, and his own, and the words, White Oak. They came within 2 days. Not many, 4 of them. The rest were too far, or too worn down by their own years. But 4 was enough. They were old men, all of them, gray and quiet and easy to underestimate, which the boy suspected had been their whole strength once. They did not arrive like an army. They arrived like family come for a long overdue visit. One made coffee on a little camp stove. One walked the fence with Hollis as if they had done it together their whole lives. 2 of them strung up something on the southern ridge that the boy did not pretend to understand. The oldest of them, A tall, lean man with a close silver beard found Eli on the second evening. They sat together on the step of the shed, watching the sun go down through the gap in the pines. "Your grandfather," the old man said, "helped my girl once when she was sick and we had nowhere to turn. An envelope showed up. No name. Just what we needed." He looked at the boy. "She's grown now. Got children of her own. So." He nodded, slow and certain. "You point. I'll follow." Eli did not trust his voice, so he only nodded back. He was beginning to understand something about his grandfather's life, that a man could be alone in a buried room for years, and still be woven into 100 lives he had quietly mended. That kindness, sent out into the dark with no name attached, comes back when you least expect it, and brings friends. The night they came in force was the night Eli would carry with him always. The quiet alarm stirred just before midnight, but it was not one frightened young man this time. The old men read the perimeter and went still, the way old men go still when something they recognize is approaching. "More than a few," the silver-bearded one said softly. "Coming up the west line. They mean it this time." Hollis took a high place on the eastern ridge. The old men spread themselves along the slope, quiet as the shadows of the pines, and Eli stood at the center of the clearing, in front of the painted door, with that old broken shotgun over his arm and his heart slamming against his ribs. He had told Nora to stay below, to lock the inner door. She had not stayed. He turned and found her standing in the open doorway of the bunker, lit from below, the one-eared rabbit pressed to her chest, her serious eyes fixed on the dark wall of trees. And in the same moment, the trees gave up their shapes. Men moving low and fast, more of them than the boy had hoped for. Two things happened almost at once. The old men on the ridge flooded the western slope with a wall of hard white light, so sudden and so total that the advancing figures froze, blind, exposed. And one of them, off to the side, away from the light, broke toward the doorway, toward the small lit shape of a girl with a rabbit. Eli's heart stopped. He was too far. He knew it the instant he started to move. Too far, by half the clearing. But Hollis was not. The old man came down off that slope faster than any man his age had a right to move. And he reached the girl an instant before the figure did, and he put his own body between Nora and the dark. And there was a sound, sharp and terrible in the cold air, and the old man went down hard against the door frame. The clearing erupted in light and shouting. And then, as fast as it had come, it broke. The figures in the white light saw the shape of the thing. Old men on the high ground, a young man in the center who would not run, and a whole hillside that knew they were there. Someone, somewhere, gave an order, and the dark swallowed them back up, one by one, until the western slope held nothing but the empty white light and the ringing silence after. Eli reached the doorway on his knees. Nora was unhurt, wide-eyed, white-faced, but whole. She had not made a sound. She was looking down at the old man crumpled against the frame, her small hand already pressed to his shoulder where the dark was spreading. "Hollis," Eli said. "Hollis." The old man's eyes found him. His face was gray with pain, but his mouth moved, and the words came rough and certain. "Girl's all right. She's all right. You hear me? She's all right. You kept her safe." The silver-bearded man was already there, kneeling, his hands moving with the quick, sure knowledge of someone who had done this work before, long ago. "Through the shoulder," he said. "He'll keep. Get me light and clean water. Now." And in the chaos of that moment, the boy felt the truth of it settle into him like a stone dropped into deep water. This was the cost. His grandfather had tried to tell him, in his gentle, roundabout way, that the second road was not free. That standing up to people like this meant that someone you loved might bleed in a cold doorway in the middle of the night. That courage was not a feeling. It was a bill, and it came due. He had said yes to this road in the safety of a buried room, with his sister's hand in his. Now he understood, fully, for the first time, what he had said yes to. Later, much later, when the gray dawn was coming up over the ridge and Hollis lay bandaged and sleeping in the lower bunk, breathing slow and steady, Nora came and sat beside her brother on the cold floor of the study. She leaned her head against his arm. "He stepped in front of me," she said quietly. "Hollis, he didn't even stop to think about it." "I know." She was quiet a while. "Grandpa was right," she said. "It's not safe. It's not going to be safe for a long time." Eli looked down at her, at this small, brave, watchful girl who had walked up a washed-out path beside him just a few weeks ago, carrying nothing in the world but a one-eared rabbit and a stubborn refusal to be afraid of quiet. "You want to stop?" he asked. He meant it. If she had said yes, he would have ended it that morning. "We can still walk away. I'd understand. Nobody would blame you." Nora thought about it. She always thought about things, truly, before she answered. Then she shook her head. "No," she said, "because then it would mean Hollis got hurt for nothing, and Grandpa waited for nothing, and Mom and Dad—" She did not finish that one. She did not have to. "We don't stop. We just take better care of each other. That's all." And the boy pulled his little sister close in the gray light of that hard morning, with an injured old man breathing steady behind them and a wall of trees outside hiding people who wanted them gone. And he understood that whatever happened next, whatever it cost, they would not be facing it alone. That was the thing his grandfather had buried in this ground, beneath all the rest. Not money, not proof, not even the truth, but this. People who would step in front of the dark for you. People who would come when you called. A girl who would not let go of your hand. A family. The kind you are not given, but the kind you find and fight for. And keep. The days after that hard night moved slow. Hollis mended in the lower bunk, breathing steady, his color coming back by degrees. The silver-bearded old man changed his bandages with hands that remembered the work, and Nora sat beside him for hours, reading aloud from her bird books in her small, careful voice, until the old man would drift off mid-page with the ghost of a smile on his face. The watchers had pulled back, for now. The aircraft did not come. The dark vehicles at the end of the road had gone. But Eli knew better than to believe it was over. A thing like this did not end because one bad night had failed. It only paused and gathered itself, and waited for the next opening. He could not simply hold the line forever. Sooner or later, the people who wanted this land gone would find a softer way in, a patient way, the kind of way that does not come up a hillside in the dark, but slides in through paper and lawyers and time. He needed to end it, not survive it, end it. And so, in the long, quiet evenings, while the others slept, the boy went back to the one place that had told him the truth before. He went back to the journal. He read it differently this time, not for the story of his family. He knew that story now, carried it in his chest like a stone he was slowly learning to hold. This time, he read it the way his grandfather had taught him, without ever being in the room to teach him. He read it for the patterns, for the thing hidden inside the thing. And on the third night, he found it. It was a name written small in the margin, almost as an afterthought, and then written again pages later in a different year, and then a third time near the end. The same name 3 times, and each time beside it the same short notation in his grandfather's neat hand. Inside the wall. May matter in the end. Eli sat with the open journal in the amber light and turned that name over and over in his mind. Inside the wall. His grandfather had spent his life listening for the one voice that did not belong, the one thread out of place. And here, 3 times across the years, the old man had circled a single name, a man who was somehow inside the very thing the family was standing against. A man on the other side of the wall. And there was something else, a small thing, the kind of thing a boy might have missed if he had not spent weeks learning to read his grandfather's silences. Beside the name, the second time it appeared, 3 more words had been added later, in slightly different ink. Knew her once. Her. Eli did not know, yet, what any of it meant. But he understood that his grandfather had left this name here on purpose, buried in the margin of a journal the way he buried everything. In plain sight, for the one person patient enough to dig. This was not a thing handed to him. It was a thing he had found. And his grandfather, he understood now, had known he would. It took Eli the better part of 2 weeks to find the man. He did it carefully, the way he had been taught. He used what was in the vault and what Mortimer could reach, and a great deal of patience that the boy had not known he possessed. He followed the thread the way his grandfather would have followed it, not pulling, only tracing, one quiet step at a time, and at the end of the thread was a man, an older man, thin, tired in the way of someone who has carried something heavy for a very long time, and has stopped expecting to ever set it down. When the boy finally reached him, when a message went out, careful and quiet, carrying a name the old man had not heard spoken aloud in years, something on the other end of the line went very still. And then the old man said only this, "You found me." It was not fear in his voice. It was something closer to relief. The relief of a man who has been waiting a long, long time for a knock on the door and is almost glad, when it finally comes, to stop waiting. "I think," the old man said, "you'd better come and sit down with me. There's a great deal you don't know, and a great deal I should have said a long time ago." The boy went to meet him alone. Mortimer had argued against it. So had the silver-bearded man. But Eli had learned by now that some things a person has to do himself, and some doors only open for one set of hands. They met in a quiet place, the kind of place where 2 people can talk without being seen. The old man was already there when Eli arrived, sitting with his hands folded tight on the table in front of him, And when the boy walked in, the old man looked up, and his face did something complicated. He looked at Eli for a long moment. He searched the boy's face the way a person searches an old photograph, looking for someone who is gone. "You have your mother's eyes," he said finally. The boy went still. "I knew her," the old man said softly. "Long before you were born. She came from my side of the family. A cousin of a kind. The threads of these things get tangled, but the blood is the blood. She and my wife used to write each other, back when there was time for that sort of thing. When you were born, she sent a picture. A little thing, no bigger than a playing card. It sat on the front of our ice box for years." His hands tightened on the table. "I held you once," he said, "when you were small enough to forget it. You won't remember, but I do." Eli could not speak. He had come here for evidence, for a weapon, for the thing that would end the war. He had not expected to find a man who had held him as a baby, who had known his mother's laugh, who carried, in his tired old face, some faint and far-off echo of a family the boy had spent his whole life believing did not exist. "I worked for them," the old man said. The words came slow and heavy and full of an old shame. "For a long time. I sat at a desk on the inside, and I watched the whole shape of what they were. I saw what they did to people, and I came to understand eventually what they had done to her, to your mother, and to your father." He looked down at his folded hands. "I knew. For years, I knew. And I told myself there was nothing to be done. I told myself I had a wife to protect. I told myself I had no proof anyone would believe. I told myself a great many things, and none of them were the truth. The truth was that I was afraid. And so, I stayed quiet, while 2 young people lay in the ground, and 2 children grew up with no one. I stayed quiet." The room was very still, but I couldn't make myself look away, he said. "So I kept things, quietly, one small piece at a time, year after year, everything they did, everywhere the money went, everyone it touched. I told myself I was keeping it for nothing, for my own conscience maybe, so that somewhere on this earth the truth at least existed, even if no one ever read it." He raised his eyes to the boy, and then word reached me a little while back that someone had come back to that land in the hills, that a carver was standing on the old ground and saying no. His voice grew rough. "I have waited a long time to be asked, son. I think I have been waiting my whole life. So ask me, whatever it is you need. Ask me." Eli looked at this tired old man across the quiet table, this stranger who was not a stranger, this piece of his mother that had survived when so little else had. He thought about his grandfather, who had written this name in a margin 3 times across the years. Inside the wall. May matter, in the end. Knew her once. The old man had been right, as he had been right about so much. It mattered. In the end, it mattered more than anything. "I need you to tell the truth," Eli said quietly. "All of it. To the right people. The ones it can't be buried by." The old man closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something had lifted from him. Some great gray weight he had carried so long he had forgotten the shape of standing up straight. "Yes," he said. "Oh yes, whenever you say the word." The man at the center came himself, in the end. The boy had not expected that. He had pictured papers and lawyers and faceless threats arriving in the mail. Not this. A long, dark car at the end of the road on a gray afternoon, and a man with silver hair stepping out of it, alone. The same face from the wall in the vault. The square, reassuring jaw. Older now, seen in the flesh, and somehow smaller. He climbed the path slowly. He did not look like a storm anymore. He looked like a tired man who had run out of quieter moves, and had come to make the last one in person. They stood facing each other in the clearing, the boy, and the man who had ordered the brake lines cut, a lifetime ago. "You're younger than I thought," the man said. Eli said nothing. "Whatever your grandfather left you, it isn't worth your life, or hers." A glance toward the bunker, toward where a girl might be. "I can make all of this go away. The debt, the danger, you and the child, comfortable, somewhere far from here. One signature." The boy looked at him for a long, quiet moment, and then he did the thing the man had clearly never once prepared for. He smiled. "My father wanted to be a teacher," Eli said. His voice did not shake. "My mother could make a stranger feel like family in 5 minutes. You took them on an ordinary day to send a message to an old man." The man's face did not move, but something behind his eyes did. "I'm not signing anything," the boy said. "And you should know, it's already out. What my grandfather kept, what another man kept for years from inside your own wall. It left this land days ago." A pause. "You didn't come here to make me an offer. You came to find out whether I knew." "I know." For a moment, the powerful man simply stood there in the dirt of a place that had never belonged to him, and understood that he had already lost. He did not say goodbye. He turned and walked back down the path to his long, dark car, and the boy watched him go the way he had once watched a surveyor go, without raising his voice, without looking away. And after that, it came the way the truth comes, once it finally gets loose. The record his grandfather had buried beneath the hills, set down beside the years of quiet keeping the tired old man had carried, made a thing that could not be unmade. A thing too large to bury, too clear, once it was spoken, for any amount of money to wash clean. The shape of powerful men that had loomed over the family like a storm began to come apart. The man with the silver hair fell, not all at once, the way a great tree falls, a long, slow, groaning lean, and then the ground itself seeming to shudder. The buyers stopped buying. The watchers did not come back. And one morning, the boy woke and stood in the clearing, and there was nothing overhead but the high blue sky, and nothing in the trees but birds. It was over. The boy stood in the empty clearing for a long time that morning, and he did not feel the way he had expected to feel. He had imagined triumph, a great rushing thing, a fist raised against the sky. What he felt instead was quieter and deeper and much harder to hold. He felt his father's name finally spoken in the right rooms. He felt his mother's eyes looking back at him out of a tired old man's memory. He felt his grandfather, who had spent his last years with his hand against a cold wall, finally able to rest. He felt the weight of the metal tags against his chest. And for the first time, the chain did not seem too long. He was growing into it. The boy kept the land when the last offer came, and one did come, smaller now, almost pleading. from the wreckage of the thing that had wanted it for so long. He turned it down without a second thought. He folded the paper closed and set it aside and went back out to his garden. And in the spring, he built the house. He hired a few men out of the town below, quiet, capable men who knew the local stone and the local weather. And he worked beside them every single day, from the first light to the last. He learned to read a level. He learned the slow patience of a hand-laid stone foundation. His hands, already hard from the garden, grew harder still. Hollis worked beside him as soon as his shoulder would let him, slower than before, but no less stubborn. The silver-bearded man came back twice that season to help raise the frame, and stayed each time longer than he had meant to. It was a sturdy, modest house of cedar and local stone, set on the ridge where Nora had once stood and pointed and said, "What if we built a house right there?" It had wide windows that let the afternoon light pour in across the floors. It had a porch that looked out over the long fold of the valley. And the front door, Eli painted himself. A deep, calm blue. The same blue Nora had drawn, over and over, on the wall above her bunk. In a buried room. In the hardest days. Before any of them knew whether they would live to see a door at all. He did not seal the bunker. He cleaned it instead. He kept the air moving through it. He turned the study into a library and left the tapes in their patient stack and left the journal on the desk where it had waited for him. The drawing stayed on the wall. The 100 careful pictures of a little girl drawn by a man who had loved her from across the dark. Nora went down sometimes by herself and sat among them. She did not say much about it, but Eli understood. It was the closest thing she had to a grandfather's lap, and she was not ready to let it go. He did not ask her to. On a cold, bright morning, when the first green was coming back to the hills, they laid the family to rest. Walter Carver's grave, under the white oak at the south fence, was given a proper stone at last, and beside him, in the family ground where they belonged, the boy laid his mother and his father, brought home the two of them at long last, to the land that knew their name. 3 stones, side by side, under the great old tree. The boy stood at the foot of them on that cold spring morning, with his sister beside him and Hollis a little ways back, hat in his hands, and the silver-bearded man, and the others standing quiet among the trees. And Eli did a thing he had been carrying with him for weeks. He had found, near the very bottom of the stack of tapes, one last cassette. It had no instruction on the label. No play this first. No only if you have to fight. Just a single word, in that neat block hand, last. He had not played it. He had been saving it, though he could not have said until that morning what he was saving it for. Now he knew. He had brought the old machine up from the bunker. He set it down on the grass at the foot of the 3 stones, and in the cold, bright air, with the wind moving soft in the white oak overhead, he pressed the worn button-marked play. The speakers hissed. The reels began to turn. And there was no message, no final words, no instructions, no truth, no warning. Just a voice, humming. An old man, somewhere in a buried room, humming a tune to himself. A soft, low, simple thing. The kind of tune a person hums without thinking when they believe no one is listening. When their hands are busy and their mind is somewhere far away and gentle. It was an old song, The boy did not know its name, but Hollis, standing behind him, made a small sound in his throat, and Eli understood that the old man knew it, that perhaps it was a tune two young men had hummed together a long time ago in a room far from here, with the same kind of work in their ears, a song from before the loss, from before any of it. Walter Carver, alone in the dark, humming to himself across the years. And then, faint beneath the humming, the soft scratch of a pencil. He had been drawing. The boy understood all at once what they were hearing. The old man had left the recorder running while he sat at his desk in the quiet, drawing pictures of a little girl he was not allowed to hold, and humming an old song to keep himself company. He had not meant it as a message. It was simply a moment. A small, ordinary moment of a lonely man's evening, caught by accident and kept, and it was the most precious thing he had left them. Beside her brother, Nora began, very quietly, to cry. She slipped her hand into his, and the two of them stood at the foot of 3 stones, under a white oak, in the cold, bright spring, and listened to a dead man hum and draw in a buried room. And for the first time in either of their lives, neither one of them felt abandoned. They had been so sure, the both of them, for so long, that no one had ever wanted them. And here, in this soft scratch of a pencil and this low old tune, was the proof that it had been the opposite all along, that they had been wanted, watched over, drawn again and again, by a hand that loved them across an impossible distance. They had simply been too far away to hear the humming. Now they could hear it, and they would carry it with them the rest of the way. The tape played to its gentle end. The reels slowed. The hiss faded into the wind, and Eli reached down and pressed stop, and let the white oak and the birds in the long valley below fill the silence the old man had left. The seasons turned. Nora started at the school in the town below when the leaves came back. She was shy at first, the way she was with all new things. She watched before she joined, the way she had always watched. But she found her way slowly, the way she found her way into everything. By the end of her first year, she had gathered a small handful of friends and a great deal of knowledge about the birds of the valley, and she had talked a patient teacher into letting her run a little project out of a back window that looked toward the eastern feeders. She kept her notebooks. She filled them. She drew the way her grandfather had drawn. Only her pictures were of hawks and finches and the blue door of a house that now, at last, was real. Eli did not go away. He had thought he might once, that when it was over he would take Nora and find a city somewhere and start a life with walls and locks and other people's noise. But the land had its hooks in him now. The good kind, this time. He studied instead from the desk in the new living room, with the wide windows pouring light across his books. He started with the practical things, the things a man needs to hold on to land and protect a family. And then, the way these things go, he found himself drawn toward the law, toward the quiet, patient work of standing between powerful people and the ones they would otherwise step on. Mortimer became his teacher in this, his mentor of a sort. The old lawyer drove out to the ridge once a month, and then, as his hip grew worse, once a season, and then, when the trip became too much for him, he sent letters instead. Letters in a hand that grew shakier with the years, but never less precise. Eli kept every one of them in a drawer of the old desk in the bunker beside the journal where the family kept the things that mattered. The young man, Dale, was never spoken of again between them. He had drifted off to whatever life waits for a person who has been given a mercy he did not earn. Eli did not hate him. He had decided that cold night in the clearing not to spend his life carrying that kind of weight, and he found, as the years went by, that he did not miss it. Hollis and the silver-bearded man, who turned out to have nowhere in particular he needed to be, took up together in a small cabin a quarter-mile down the ridge. They had decided, separately and without ever discussing it, that home was the place where you could see the smoke rising from the next chimney over. And so, on a long blue evening, in the slow gold of an autumn that felt a great deal like peace, 4 people sat together on the porch of the house with the blue door. The valley below was filling slow with shadow. The sun was painting the far ridge in a long gradient of orange and violet. Hollis and the old man each held a cup of black coffee, their faces easy in the fading light. Nora sat cross-legged on the porch boards, a notebook open on her knee, drawing a hawk that wheeled somewhere high above the trees, and Eli stood at the railing. The metal tags rested cool against his chest, beneath his shirt. The blue door stood open behind him, letting the last warm air of the day into the house. And down the ridge, just visible through the gap in the pines, a thread of smoke rose from a small cabin chimney, gray against the deepening sky. He thought about a brass key in the palm of his hand, in a quiet office, in a life that felt now like it had belonged to someone else. He thought about a rotting gray shack and a painted door in the ground, and a voice on a tape saying a word he had never been called before. Home. He thought about a man who had spent his last years in a buried room beneath his own grandchildren, choosing every single morning to be misunderstood, so that 2 children he loved more than his own life would be allowed to grow up. And he thought about what an inheritance truly was. It was not 500 acres. It was not a steel door under a stone. It was not even the truth, finally told, or the weight that had lifted from the family when it was. It was a story, handed down across the dark, from one set of hands to another. And the choice, at the end of it, of what kind of person you would let that story make of you. Home, the boy understood now, was not a thing a person was handed. It was a thing you fought for, a thing you built with your own 2 hands, with the help of people who chose to stand beside you, on a piece of ground that had learned your name and decided to keep it. He turned from the railing to look at his sister. She felt his eyes on her, the way she always did, and she looked up from her notebook, and she smiled at him. A real smile, the kind that had been so rare in the gray years, and so common now. The light was very soft. The wind moved gentle in the pines, and somewhere down the ridge a hawk called once, long and clear, and the smoke rose steady from the chimney, and the door behind them stood open and blue. Eli Carver, who had once believed that no one in the whole wide world had ever wanted him, stood on his own porch, on his own land, in a house he had built with his own hands, beside the people who had chosen to come and chosen to stay, and looked out over a valley that had, after so much patience and so much cost, and so much love sent quietly into the dark, become the only word he had ever truly needed. Home.